All right, so now it's my pleasure to introduce John Lax. Okay. We figured by now you've had enough academics, and so we were going to have a practitioner put some real-world stuff in place for us. John is a partner and project director at Dockyard, which is a design and development consultancy in Boston. John has managed multiple large-scale development projects in a variety of industries, including financial, education, health, fitness, and marketing. John's bio says he specializes in pragmatic project management. So I wondered what that was, and I went and read his blog, which I can recommend highly. John doesn't mince words. Consider this. The secret sauce is always the people, not the process. It's a perfect introduction. But I particularly like this one. Allow me to quote. Whether you love them or hate them, cost estimates are here to stay. Beware of anyone who slaps an estimate on the table without providing you an explanation of how that estimate was derived. Therefore, instead of grumbling about them, use them as a means to have a conversation. What a perfect example of the conference theme. Please welcome John Lax.
Just bear with me for 1 second while I bring up my talk here, which is buried in this taskbar somewhere. 1 second. I work in IT, but I still not really versed in the personal computer. 1 second. There we go. All right, so good late morning, everybody. Again, my name is John Lax, and really happy to be here. The conversation thus far has been inspiring, and to be honest with you, has almost forced me to start thinking about how I actually might change up my presentation completely over the next 20 minutes or so. But in the interest of trying to be concise, I'll try to stay on task with that, but certainly want to give some time for open discussion. So let me just start off by saying, first off, I typically give talks more that are involving technique, methodology, practices. That's typically what people like to hear from me. Today it's a little bit different. It's somewhat more autobiographical. I'm going to be talking a little bit about a journey that I've just taken over the last couple of years. And I'm doing it as a demonstration of empathy for the project management community. Because as I've seen through this whole first few hours of this conference thus far, we're asking project managers to be structured. We're asking project managers to be flexible. We're asking project managers to not fail. We're basically the Superman Superwoman metaphor there, or analogy is spot on. So everyone in this room, you are in a tough gig, and what I wanted to do was I've been doing this for about 14 years now. And the journey that I took was one where I started to use some of my emotional intelligence and sensing to say the environment that I was operating in as a project manager was not feeling right. And I think the environment to which we operate as project managers in is also paramount. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that environment and this change that I went through over the last couple of years. So real quick about me, just to give you context, I believe anything project related is driven by the context. So I'm going to give you the John Lax context. Born and raised here in Boston, so I haven't gone far from the nest. About 14 years in corporate America, came out of college in 2001, smack into 9/11, was involved in a large enterprise acquisition, thus then a downsizing, and then moved on to some other large enterprises and lived through the Great Recession, and I'm still here being able to talk to you guys today. I've worked in software development my entire career, but I am not a computer scientist. I'm a business management undergrad major. It's the only degree I hold right now, other than 14 years of doing the job. And I grew up as a technical project manager, which is not too atypical of a track in software development. I was a business technical analyst, and those around me in my environment identified me as a good candidate, potentially for project management. So I didn't choose project management. It started to choose me, and as I got into it, it started to feel right. And I could go on for a long period of time talking about what I believe about DNA and project management. I actually think there is a strong correlation just between your proclivity for the work and whether it's something you should pursue. But currently, here I am. I've moved, this transition I went through was moving from this large enterprise environment where I spent over a decade and into a small company setting, and where I'm currently partner and project director at Dockyard Inc. here in Boston, which is, as Roger introduced, a web application and development firm. But what's really about me, that's my resume. This is the stuff I do. This is what creates John Lax. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a competitive mountain biker, at least trying to be. Love to sail, and also winter sports enthusiast, but I can't take credit for that jump right there. That's Google stock imagery right there. But all the other ones really are me and my family. So I thought about this talk first off, and I thought one audience that will no doubt could walk away with something from this is those who are project managers in the large enterprise setting. And I said, you know what? I actually think the message might be broader than that. And I started thinking about those project managers, the project managers who might be in a small company, and their frame of reference or perspective might be from the small company setting, and maybe they've sometimes wondered what it might like to be in the large enterprise. So maybe you'll get something out of it. Then the large enterprise itself, if there's anyone in here or online who's in part of the PMO or is a manager of project managers, I thought you might get a little bit out of this from a employee retention perspective. Think about the things that are important to us as project managers, and what might keep us around or what might push us away. And then lastly, the small company. Quick antidote on the small company. So when I was making this transition from the large to the small, I received some feedback from a technical recruiter that basically indicated to me that said, you know what, I do a lot of mid and senior level placement for small companies, IT firms, software development companies. And he said to me, just the fact that you might have a particular large enterprise on your resume might be an immediate discount to you as a candidate for those companies and for those jobs in those smaller companies. That really struck me. That's real. So, you know, I've been doing my hard time for the last 10 years in this large enterprise, and all of a sudden they're going to tell me that hard time has actually now taken me off the table in terms of consideration from some of these jobs in this smaller company context. So that struck me. This is real, and maybe we'll come back to that a little bit later in this talk. So here's the journey, real quick. I was at the large company, probably considered 2, 3, 4 times during that time about a move. Didn't make it up until recently. I'm going to talk a little bit about what was making me consider the move, what was going through my mind in terms of the transition, and then what it was like when I arrived in this completely new context. So while those soft skills are transferable, there is no doubt that those soft skills need to be applied in an appropriate way within either the small or large company context. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So first off, this is not a hit on the large enterprise. It happened to be my first stop when I came out of college, and I spent a good long run there, and I think I got a lot out of it. So I think to anybody out there who's either a student or who's in the large enterprise right now, know that you need to take advantage of these things. You're there now, so these things are made available to you, sometimes more often than not, depending on the organization. But be sure that you're getting this out of your experience in the large enterprise. Fundamental business skills, just things like written communication, public speaking, those soft skills that you can get within a large enterprise, because there's just so much communication that's occurring in the large enterprise, you've got to be able to do something with it. Exposure to methodology. So process runs rampant in the large enterprise, for better or worse, and there's a lot of it. So as a project manager, you certainly are going to have lots of exposure to methodology and process, and you need to absorb that. And that's certainly something that I gained significantly from our large enterprise. When you get 40,000 person enterprise, 8,000 person IT departments, there's a lot of points of view in terms of process and methodology, and I kept my ears open. Tenured practitioners, depth of expertise. So there's some people that have been quality assurance engineers in my context for their entire lives. All they've cared about is just testing software and quality. So these individuals who have this tenured experience are just critical resources, and they were a critical resource to me when I was there in the large enterprise. Tools, love them or hate them, they exist. In the large enterprise, typically you have lots of vendors knocking on your doors with new tools that can be used in the project management context, and certainly I've seen a lot of them. I don't love them very much at all, but at the same time, at least I've seen what they're up to and what they're trying to do. And then the complex environments. So the large enterprise certainly introduced me to technical complexity, particularly in software. Legacy systems, undocumented software. A new project would start up and we'd look for the guy that built that project a year ago. He's gone to the small company, or he's gone to another large enterprise. So basically I don't want to say we're rebuilding the wheel every single time, but I definitely came to appreciate that nothing was really felt easy in the large enterprise. Politically challenging, right? So I gave good time in the enterprise. I did a decade. I started to appreciate the fact that politics wasn't only important to me to be a good project manager, but it was also important to me to survive, get a good paycheck, and get a good rating on my performance management review cycle. And then geographically, these large enterprises are spread domestically throughout the country and throughout the world. And I think it's actually a great bit of experience that I had, which has actually made me much more versed as a business person. Business doesn't just happen in one location, it happens around the world, and the large enterprise does open your eyes to that. Early in my career, I was given opportunities to exercise my managerial skills, so I was just thrown some direct reports. I think I might have been 5 or 6 years of experience, thrown some direct reports where I had to ramp up on typical managerial skills. Coaching, career development, performance management. And as anyone, all project managers in this room can appreciate, there's so much core management stuff in project management. So no doubt that was great for me. And then global business, I go back to this. I was given an opportunity to live abroad for an extended period of time with my family. Things that you really probably could only get from the large enterprise. So I was able to go to and be embedded in a culture, and as a project manager to engage with the team, because that was deemed to be the most successful recipe for that particular program that I was involved with. And job security, sure, it was good. I made it through the Great Recession. We were safe, and it felt good. And I think the enterprise provided a nice tent over our heads with that in that respect. So something started not feeling right when I was in this. This was an evolving point of view. But one thing for sure is as I moved up in the ranks within the large enterprise, politics and communication complexity started to just overwhelm everything that I was doing. And at the end of the day, as a project manager, we are makers. We like to take an idea and turn it into something. And to be honest with you, while I was involved in that on a daily basis, getting paid pretty well to do so, it started feeling like I was getting further and further removed from the making and the building and the creative side of project management. So that started to feel strange. And then a department for everything. So we're talking about project organization and the environment that I was placed in. I was never necessarily had direct reports in the large enterprise, or the people on my team weren't my direct reports. It was a matrixed environment. But what I started to see was the vision that I was trying to instill and motivate within my project teams was being distracted by the vision that was trying to be instilled by those line managers, right? So conflicting priorities, right? And I think that puts us as project managers in that type of environment in quite a precarious position. And then the other thing I've started to see was, if anyone's ever read Frederick Brooks's Mythical Man Month book, I highly recommend it. I've been inspired by that. It seems like the large enterprise has this knee-jerk reaction to throw people at the problem, right? So teams started getting larger and larger versus smaller and more specific in terms of their objectives and intents. So what we had were these huge, huge programs. The last program I had in the large enterprise was a $40 million program, 40 people, 3 continents, just enormous. And while we were effectively able to move the project forward, I can certainly tell you that there was so much waste involved in the project itself, just from a communication complexity perspective, that we probably weren't getting the highest return on investment that we could. So looking for those smaller, more efficient teams. The world felt like it was moving faster outside the walls of the enterprise. So while the enterprise keeps their ears open, I think sometimes they're very slow to adopt new processes, new innovation, new technology because they want it to prove out. They don't want to take too many significant risk because there's a lot at stake. And I respect large enterprises for that. There is a lot at stake when you're in that large enterprise. So, being nimble and being agile in terms of adopting new things that are occurring on the outside does have to be somewhat measured. I get that. Cube Farm, little social connection. I think cubes are ridiculous. And I spent so much time in that cube environment, and that's actually one of the things I can't believe even still exists in the workplace anymore. It's not healthy, and it's no way for a project team to effectively collaborate and communicate with one another. And then meetings and meetings and meetings. I think anyone in the large enterprise would know you would have a meeting to plan a meeting for a meeting that was going to be coming up later on. And the meetings started consuming us, and we weren't getting anything done. So, this environment started to surround me, and started thinking a little bit harder about maybe I needed to make a shift. So do I have the right stuff? Self-doubt sets in. I've been here for a decade. Long time. It's over 25% of my lifetime I've done time in the large enterprise. Do I have a chance of even making it? So this next section of this presentation is some cliff notes that I offer to you. That if you go on an interview and you're a large enterprise PM, think about your experience in that large enterprise and potentially spin it in this way. Because I went through the interview process and eventually found a home, and some of this worked, but take it or leave it. So developing a point of view, though, is, I think, extremely important, and I think that's come up from some of our speakers here. We can be given the knowledge and the technical skills, but at the end of the day, you do have to say that I believe that in this particular situation, this is the way we should approach it. You've got to be able to suggest. So when I was in this interviewing battery across many different companies, being able to articulate a point of view around a way I would approach things as a project manager is critical. What practices would I use? How would have I reacted in this situation? Those type of things are critical, and I can't emphasize that enough. Also, spinning the fact that, I did my time in the large enterprise. So don't talk to me about communication skills. Everything I had to do was communicate. I had to communicate with email. I had to communicate in meetings. I had to communicate virtually through web conferences. So when you're leaving that large enterprise, you have a battery of communication skills, which are super, uber important within that small company setting. Stakeholder management. You're never managing one stakeholder in the large enterprise, so you've definitely been given that opportunity to manage many different stakeholders and their different diverse interests in your project. And then from a risk management perspective, we're talking lots at stake. So this goes back to I respect large enterprises and how much is at stake. I was involved in the evolution of a portfolio management platform for this large financial services company, which will go unnamed, and one error or one bug, if you would, in our software as it related to some of this would have resulted in hundreds and millions of dollars in error. So stakes are high. We weren't landing airplanes on aircraft carriers with our software, but we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in error were at stake. So when it came to risk as a project manager, definitely was in an environment where risk was a high lever of importance. So the other thing the large enterprise did was force me to be a problem solver. This goes back to every problem in the large enterprise felt like a big problem because of all the research and analysis that had to go into any move you needed to make. So you became quite resourceful. You used your network. Again, all important soft skills as well. And then one important thing is when I went into when I was doing my interviewing, they said to me, well, you've got a lot of experience managing these large virtual teams, but what can you do with a small team? Seems like you've got much more experience with the larger teams. Are you going to be able to operate with a small team? The good news is when I was working in the large enterprise, we worked in teams which were broken up into smaller cross-functional entities. So what I had to do was I needed to spin my experience to articulate, while I did have oversight for a large program, we were operating these different not silos, that would be a terrible term to say. We were operating these cross-functional entities, which were representative of a smaller type of team that you might find in a small company. So that answer seemed to go over pretty well with most of the small companies I talked to. And then adaptability and openness to change. It seems like this is what it's all about right now. Things are moving so fast. My my willingness to be open to changes within that large enterprise and demonstrations of moving from different business unit problems to other business unit problems were some examples of responses that I provided when I was interviewing with the small companies. Okay, I'm ready to go. Now, so this is where just natural anxiety of change sets in. I started thinking more about it. All right, now I've got an opportunity to get into the small company. Am I going to be able to hack it? Am I going to survive? Or in 1 year from my start date, am I going to be turning around and going back to my large enterprise and being like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave? And then in terms of under the microscope or versus blended in with the herd, right? Within the large enterprise, there's so many people. I'm not saying you can step back into the shadows of the organization, but there's just so much happening around you. It's hard for you to shine so brightly that you're very obvious. But in the small company, you are in the center of attention and you're very obvious. So there's no more herd around you. You are there and in the spotlight. So that definitely forces you to be on your toes. And then just thinking about breaking those big company mental models that I was talking about, would I be able to do so? Well, I found a company that aligned with my principles. And this Dockyard, the web application firm that I'm working with, had the dossier in terms of the environment that I felt like was necessary to be a successful project manager. So as my number one consideration in project management, other than I needed to stay in Boston, because I love Boston and born and raised here, was I needed to find a company that aligned with my values and belief system and point of view in terms of what was important as a project manager. When I arrived at that company, while I had a lot in my tool belt, I kept my mouth shut and I listened. And I think listening is one of those soft skills, which is actually we haven't talked about yet. But sometimes just keeping your ears open and listening to the environment, learning what the environment truly is once you arrive, and then share suggestions was an important consideration for me when I was starting in that small company. And then prepare yourself for opinions. These small companies don't exist without very opinionated people because they had an opinion that they had a better idea than everyone else out there, so they started a company. So that environment is one that definitely needed to be conscious of when you arrive there. So the strong fundamental business and communication skills went a long way. I was attending meetings in the small company setting and in firm and what I observed was it was just people sitting around a table. It was getting late. It was starting a little bit late. Really wasn't any clear objectives in terms of why we're sitting in the room. And I said, wait a second, large enterprise time, right? You know, we got all these meetings. We know how to run a meeting. So bringing that into the small company was actually a value add that I definitely was able to offer. Yeah. So little process typically in these small companies. Small companies tend to be process phobic. They also tend to be project management phobic because I think we come with a bit of some baggage as it relates to process. But that process that we do bring can help them. So it's using your soft skills and your influencing and your negotiation to suggest those the processes that may help that small company context. And then throw out the tools. So going back to tools, I went completely low-tech when I showed up at my small company. I said, you know what? I'm not going to use any tool because I feel sometimes tools push us in a direction towards process. Instead, I said, I'm going to use Post-it notes. I'm going to use whiteboards. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that now I have a fully co-located team that I can look eye to eye with on a daily basis. And I think that's important. And then overlay that with a choice around tools that will augment that context and those practices that you think are going to be important for that small company. This one's great for project managers. Prepare yourself for hyperdrive productivity. So what happens when you don't have those conflicting departmental objectives? What happens when you're not 5 time zones apart from your team? This is what happens is you start to observe this hyperdrive productivity for a team that might be working on something similar as you might have experienced in a large enterprise. But the pitfall here is harness that energy because that energy can run rampant like a wild cowboy. And what you need to do as a project manager is you need to make sure that energy and hyperdrive productivity is harnessed in a direction towards the overall objectives of the project that you might be involved in. And this one's great. Here's my wink. Have meetings. Found in the small company, people tend not to have meetings, and sometimes it just makes sense to have them. So certainly have them with a purpose and set clear objectives, but bring meetings into these small companies. And then expand your mind in terms of what you're capable of doing as a PM. I respect everyone who's involved in this audience and who is online, who is a project manager. You have so many skills, and there's so many other things that you can do to contribute to a business. So if you get the opportunity to move into a small company, look to do something different. Your skill set is phenomenal. And one thing that I'm doing right now outside of project management, which is actually making me a better project manager, is I'm involved in business development. I'm actually on the front end of the sales cycle. So I'm actually thumbing through the projects that I'll eventually manage, which is a wonderful place to be in, because I can make sure there's a good cultural fit with the client. Someone had a great comment about how do you meet the expectations of a client when there is no tolerance for failure. Well, you know what you do is you pick the right clients. So, I'm not saying I'm gaming the system, but I'm certainly using some of my skills in terms of bringing in business for our company. So I know I went really fast here because I hope I left us a little bit of time for some questions, because I want to hear from you and field those questions. But one thing's for sure is I'm not standing here saying I'm never going to go back to the large enterprise. At some point in my career, I am open to the fact that that might happen to me again. But right now, I'm pretty happy where I am working in that small company. So, questions? Let's exit this for you.
Hi, that was excellent. Thank you. One bullet point that jumped out at me was to bring in process in a way that you're not pontificating. So can you expand on how you did that, what process you were able to bring in so far, and how you managed to bring that in?
Yes. So,
Microphone.
yeah, sorry.
You can use one of the desk ones if you're more comfortable.
Okay, yeah, I'll use this. So processes that I brought in without pontificating. So in the IT context, typically the processes to which I have a firmer belief in are agile processes, right? And agile is a pretty loaded term. So what I did, and this is, again, based upon experience, is I tried to empathize with the teams and try to understand the challenges that our developers, the people who were involved, the engineers who were involved in the project were facing, and I spun process as a way to help them alleviate their pain points. So it's a sales technique as well, and influencing technique as well, but I think what I was able to prove to them is that, you know what, this is just not process for process sake, this is going to make your life better. And luckily, they trusted, we engaged in the trust, and we shook hands and we said, yeah, I believe you. And then, but we were able to go on and we would prove it together. And then we were able to embrace that process.
Thank you.